That night in Burnton. A couple of years ago, tail end of the pandemic, I was sent on an overnight work trip to Burnton, a small picturesque seaside town about 5 hours away from the big city where we live. This is the story of what happened that night. I was done with my meetings later in the afternoon. We drove into the hotel parking lot, me and my wife Hilda. It had been a hard day, a long, early morning drive to Burnton, followed by a series of intense meetings with development people. Everyone was excited. Land prices were going up like crazy in this sleepy, forgotten town. Old houses that were on the market for 10 years were shifting like hot cakes. But by 5 p.m., my energy was dwindling. I was dying to get to my hotel room and unwind. I know my wife Hilda was looking forward to it, too. She had opted to travel with me, which was quite unusual for a work trip. I put it down to her being bored from going nowhere in the pandemic, and it was nice enough to have her with me. And it seemed like she had had a pleasant afternoon in town while I was at my meetings, in the local coffee shops, and by the beach. But she looked tired and drawn too. The first thing that caught our attention was the police car, neatly parked by the main entrance. Then I spotted a couple yellow and orange police barriers, folded away and lying to the side. We didn't think much of it, but there was no doubt the receptionist, as she checked us in, looked somewhat worried and tense. I gestured outside. "Looks like you've been having some excitement here," I remarked amiably. She gave a little nervous laugh. "Oh yes, well, very sad, but the police presence is going to be over in an hour, and I am sure you'll have an excellent night's stay with us." She smiled brightly at me, all her teeth showing. At the same time, my wife, who had been chatting to someone in the lobby behind me, swept up to the counter. "You had a murder here last night, and you weren't going to tell us?" she demanded. I felt bad for the poor receptionist. She flushed and started stammering. Mr. Winters said. It wasn't necessary to alarm the GG guests. Police agreed they arrested the culprits anyway. My wife said in an imperious voice, "I am sure I would like to know if I am sleeping across a murder scene." My heart sank. I was dropping from fatigue, and at that point, I didn't care if the massacre of the innocents had happened in the lobby. I needed a lie down, followed by a nice warm bath with plenty of that snazzy hotel bath stuff, and then room service. I gave Hilda a pleading look. She read my mind through the marital wireless all us married folk have. She shrugged, snatched up the keycards, and marched off towards the elevator. I followed gratefully. In the elevator, she said, "Don't blame me if we get slaughtered in our beds tonight." I was mildly surprised. Hilda is a stoic, unimaginative woman, not given to fanciful or paranoid musings. "Oh, Hilda, you heard the poor girl. It wasn't a random attack, and they arrested the murderer anyway. Even the police are leaving." She shrugged again. We stepped out of the elevator, looking round to find our door. It was impossible to ignore more barriers and yellow crime tape further down the corridor. Hilda exclaimed, "Christ, it actually happened on our floor." I muttered and pointed to our door. "There we are, dear, room 202. Ocean view, just like you asked. Did you want to order room service?" She rolled her eyes, and we swiped in our room, about 3 doors down from the taped-off murder room. Finally, I was soaking in my bath, smelling the heavenly lavender. Hilda was on her laptop, and I heard her call out. "It was a stabbing, there's some tweets about it." I grunted something. She called again. Actually, seems like they were local business owners who had a disagreement that got out of hand. "I'm surprised you didn't hear anything at your meeting, Todd." I turned on the faucets and dipped my head under the foamy, frothy water, blocking out her voice to a distant rumble. Hours later, I woke up to the sounds of men's voices. I knew instantly where I was, but for a moment I thought they were in my room. The voices were so loud and clear. It would be impossible to fall back asleep with that noise. I had another long day ahead plus the drive back to the city, and I felt furious. I wanted to call the front desk, but didn't want to risk waking Hilda. I looked at her rolled-up body in the duvet, turned away from me. The voices were getting louder, although I couldn't understand a word of what was being said. I decided to get out of bed and go downstairs and complain. The hotel room wasn't too dark, and I slipped outside, pulling on my jacket over my pajamas. The corridor was lit with only 2 lights. I noticed the spectacularly ugly carpet, and the terrible pattern made me feel dizzy for a moment. I looked up and noticed the police barriers and tape had gone. The police must have come in after we checked into our room. For some reason, the thought made me even more unsettled. The voices sounded a bit more muffled through the corridor, and I contemplated going back to bed. As I paused, my hand still on the doorknob, I heard a sudden, loud shout louder than anything before. I froze in fear. Then silence. How come other guests were not rushing out or complaining? As I stood still in the corridor, fearful and uncertain what to do, the door 3 down from ours opened and a man staggered out, bent double, holding his stomach. He saw me and started coming towards me. Even in the dim light, I could see the blood trickling through his fingers. "William, no," somebody cried from the room. "Get him." The staggering man reached towards me with his bloody hands and grasped at my pajama shirt. "Help me," he gasped. I knew what he wanted from me, but I couldn't risk my job, my life with Hilda. And I was afraid of the men in the room, of what they could do to me if I helped William. I desperately untangled his clutching fingers from my pajama shirt. 2 other men stepped outside. "William," one of them roared, "you can't stop us." They tore him away from me, dragged him further back down the corridor, and back into the room they had come out from. I thought they couldn't see me, but just before they vanished inside, one of them turned, looked straight at me and winked. My blood ran cold. The door slammed shut behind them. The sound broke my paralysis. I turned and went back inside my own room. I knew perfectly well what was happening. I am not crazy. I was dreaming. This was a dream about the events that possibly had happened the night before we arrived. It was nothing to do with my job, nothing to do with me at all. I was doing nothing wrong. Everything was correct and above board. I fell back into a deep sleep. I woke up very early. Hilda was still fast asleep. She must have taken sleeping pills last night. I hated when she did that. I got up, extremely refreshed and alert. I could remember the dream from last night very clearly. But I was equally clear it had just been a dream, and I was ready to shower, wake up Hilda and drive off, leaving that god-awful town behind me and hopefully never to return. I didn't even want their complimentary breakfast. I decided we would stop for coffee on the way, although I knew it would be another tussle with Hilda to get her to agree to forego the endless bacon promised by the hotel buffet. I stepped into the bathroom and turned on the light, turned on the taps and glanced down, and saw the bloody handprint smears, still bright scarlet, burning on my pajama shirt.